Hello, and welcome to KRAD COVID Readings. I'm Keith R.A. DeCandido, continuing to read my writings to give you lots and lots of entertainment. Welcome to the concluding portion of Book 1 of War Stories, the Starfleet Corps of Engineers novella that tells the story of what the various members of the Da Vinci crew were doing during the Dominion War. The mainline stories follow the year after the Dominion War, as seen on Deep Space Nine. But in War Stories, I decided to do some flashbacks to show what they were doing during the war. This actually would later, sort of was a mental test bed for a notion that I would later put into practice in 2004. This War Stories came out in 2002. 2 years later, I put together an anthology called Tales of the Dominion War, which had a whole bunch of different stories of what various folks not on Deep Space Nine were doing during the Dominion War, what the Enterprise was doing, what the Klingons were doing, what the Romulans were doing, what Spock was doing, what Scotty and McCoy were doing, what the New Frontier crew was doing. And there's actually a Starfleet Corps of Engineers story that Dayton Ward and Kevin Dillmore did called Field Expediency, and a bunch of others as well. And that anthology did phenomenally well, and is still doing phenomenally well. It's still selling more than a decade and a half after it came out. Obviously, I hit on some kind of zeitgeist there, but the inspiration for doing that started with writing War Stories. Anyway, this is the last part of Book 1, and then we'll pick up in July with Book 2. But without further ado, here is Part 5 of Book 1 of War Stories. U.S.S. Sentinel, Stardate 52646.1. Lieutenant Commander Sonya Gomez had been wandering the halls of Deep Space Nine since the Sentinel docked at the station a few hours ago. I can't believe I'm lost. I never get lost. It was a point of pride with her as much as anything. She had always had a dead-on sense of direction. Within 3 months at the Academy, the fourth-year cadets were asking her for shortcuts around campus. On the Enterprise, the Oberth, Altair 4, and the Sentinel, she knew her way around almost instantly, and never needed to consult the computer for directions. Yet this Cardassian-built space station was vexing her. As she turned a corner from one identical dark corridor into another identical dark corridor, she took refuge in a familiar face heading toward her. "Chief!" Miles Edward O'Brien looked up from the pad he was studying to see Gomez. "Sonya! Sorry, Commander." Gomez grinned. "Sonya's just fine, thanks, Chief. How have you been?" "About like you'd expect," the taller man said with a wry smile. "Are Keiko and Molly doing all right?" "Oh, just fine, all things considered. Keiko's not thrilled with being this close to the front, but with the way things are going, no place is all that safe." Remembering the images of the Breen attack on San Francisco that she saw in the Sentinel's observation lounge, Gomez was forced to agree. "I know what you mean. Oh, and Molly has a brother, Kiriyoshi." That put the smile back on Gomez's face. She had always thought that Chief and Keiko Ishikawa made a good couple, and she was glad to see that her instincts had proven correct. If only those instincts had been inaccurate with Kieran, she thought, and then put it out of her head. She and Kieran Duffy had broken up when she transferred off the Enterprise to the Oberth almost 8 years ago. They had promised to keep in touch, but didn't. At times she missed him horribly, at times she forgot all about him. She idly wondered if O'Brien had heard from him. After all, the Chief had remained on the Enterprise for another year and a half after she left, before he took over as Chief of Operations at DS9. Instead, she kept the topic comfortable. "I hope his birth went more smoothly than Molly's." "You could say that. Worf didn't have to deliver this one, at least." Gomez laughed. Worf's impromptu midwifing of Keiko had happened less than a week before Gomez left for the Oberth, and had gotten her a lot of storytelling mileage on that one-year assignment. She had forgotten that the Klingon 2 was assigned to DS9. It's like its old home week. O'Brien continued. "But, it was actually Colonel Kira who carried the baby to term. It's a very long story," he said quickly, obviously not wanting to get into it. Taking the hint, she said, "I wish I had time to hear it, but I need to get to the meeting in the wardroom." "I won't keep you then," O'Brien said. "Actually, I need you to tell me how to get there. I've gotten completely turned around." Chuckling, O'Brien said, "Cardassian architecture." He quickly gave a series of clear directions that included a turbolift ride 2 levels up. "I really did get lost, didn't I?" "A bit, yeah," O'Brien said with a smile. "Don't worry, I won't tell. Your reputation's safe with me." "Thanks, and give my love to the family. Oh, and in case I don't see him, say hi to Worf for me." "Will do. Take care, Sonya." Following O'Brien's directions brought Gomez to the wardroom in under 3 minutes, and only 5 minutes after the meeting's official start time, which meant, of course, that not everyone was there and it hadn't begun yet. Gomez's CO, Captain Ana Maria Amalfitano, was already present, along with the Sentinel's first officer, Lieutenant Commander Kuljit Patel. Gomez took some satisfaction out of the fact that she couldn't see their tactical officer, so she wasn't the last to arrive. Of course, given the crowd in the wardroom, she might have missed Grimnar, their Bolian tactical officer, but a 2-meter-tall, blue-skinned humanoid tended to stand out, even in a room full of Klingons, Romulans, and Starfleet officers. The senior staffs of the Musashi and the Fredrickson made up the remainder of the Starfleet personnel, and she assumed that the Klingons and Romulans were involved in whatever their mission was. Grimnar finally came in about 2 seconds before the arrival of Admiral Ross, Captain Sisko, Chancellor Martok, and a Romulan admiral she didn't recognize. As soon as they did, many took seats, with most of the rest standing along the walls, as there were far more people than available seats. Gomez found herself wedged between a surly-looking, even by their standards, Klingon and a bored-looking Starfleet officer with full lieutenant's pips. Sisko began without preamble, speaking in an intense, deep voice. The mission we have for all of you is twofold. The Sentinel, the Musashi, and the Fredrickson will be dispatched to the Dominion outpost in Sector 25013. Amalfitano blinked. That's a bit deep in enemy territory, isn't it? Martok chuckled. Not as deep as others shall go. A fleet of 12 warbirds, aided by some Klingon vessels, the Romulan said, sounding almost pained at having to even acknowledge the Klingon contribution, will be moving under cloak to the Uriah system. That system is still under constant anti-proton scan by the outpost you will be attacking. Nodding, Amalfitano said, So you need us to take down the outpost, or at least distract them long enough for the cloaked ships to sneak in and wipe out the shipyards on Orias 3. Exactly, Sisko said. With the Breen energy-dampening weapon neutralized and the Cardassian resistance sabotaging their ships, we need to strike at a decisive target and start to get our momentum back. We think this attack on Orias will aid in that. The timing will be critical, the Romulan added. We won't be able to communicate with each other, obviously, so you must arrive at the outpost at the designated time so that we can begin our run. One of the other Starfleet captains asked, What kind of defenses can we expect? Ross spoke up then. Intelligence reports indicate that there are only 2 Jem'Hadar strike ships guarding it. The third Starfleet captain made an irritated noise. Not to put too fine a point on it, Admiral, but aren't 3 ships a bit, inadequate? We'll be lucky to get that far into Dominion territory as it is. There were some rumblings from the Klingons at that, but Ross simply said, Unfortunately, you're all we can spare. We're putting together a massive offensive against the Dominion. This is one of many strikes we'll be attempting simultaneously to keep their forces spread thin. We have to press the attack now. However, Sisko said, you will have a relatively easy time getting there. Thanks to the Cardassian resistance, we've been able to obtain a course that will get you to the outpost without encountering any patrols. It's a less direct route, so you'll have to go at warp 7 most of the way to get there at the prearranged time. Patel said, This is assuming the patrols stick to their assigned routes. We can't very well count on that. We're past the point where we can play things safe, Commander, Sisko said, just as the Klingon next to Gomez made a disparaging comment under his breath about Patel's lineage. Before her first officer could say anything else, Amalfitano spoke. We'll be fine, Captain. Don't worry. We'll clear a path for the rest of you, she added, looking around the room. Then her gaze fell upon Gomez. This is my moment, I guess, she thought. The chief engineer hadn't really needed to be at this briefing, but she had come up with an idea that the captain wanted brought up in front of Sisko and the other higher-ups. Captain, Admiral, if I may? Yes, Commander Gomez. What is it? Sisko asked. Both Martok and the Romulan bristled, but Sisko and Ross each gave her expectant looks as if they were genuinely interested in what she might have to say. Gomez took that as an encouraging sign. We might be able to do better than just having a specific course. We can alter our ships to make us look like Cardassian freighters. We've tried that in the past, Sisko said, but at this point the Jem'Hadar and the Cardassians know to look for it. With respect, sir, those had been changes to the shield harmonics. What I'm suggesting is altering the warp fields of the ships. We've tested it on the Sentinel, and it should fool even Dominion centers at warp speeds. One of the Romulans sneered. And when you come out of warp and are revealed to be a Federation ship? We keep the warp field in place. As long as they don't do an intensive scan, they shouldn't be able to tell the difference between it and the hull configuration. In fact, we can also change the shield harmonics to match. They're less likely to look for that bit of misdirection if the ship's warp field reads as an allied ship. Ross seemed intrigued by the idea. Can you maintain Warp 7 with this reconfiguration? Gomez blinked. She hadn't thought of that, but then she hadn't known they'd be forced to maintain Warp 7 until 2 minutes ago. I'm afraid not. We can only do Warp 4. Any higher in the modified warp field will tear the hull apart. Then it won't be practical for this mission. Still, it's a good idea. Send the specifications on that to the station, and, he added with glances at Martok and the Romulan Admiral, we'll share it with everyone here if we can make it work across the board. He turned back to Gomez. Good work, Commander. Gomez nodded, but was still disappointed. She was sure the trick would work, but not at Warp 7. She'd been hoping for a practical test, and this mission would have been ideal for it. The good news was that the route provided by the Cardassian resistance had done the trick, and the 3 Starfleet vessels arrived at the outpost unmolested. The other good news was that intelligence was right, and there were only 2 Jem'Hadar strike ships guarding the outpost. The rest of the news was rather bad. For one thing, the outpost itself turned out to be armed with energy weapons of a type Gomez didn't recognize. They plowed through the Fredrickson shields with little efforts, leaving the Excelsior-class ship at a sitting duck for the Jem'Hadar. It was destroyed within 2 minutes of their arrival at the station, in the sector. Steinberg, get me a reading on that damn weapon, Gomez bellowed at her assistant chief. In a voice as calm as hers was frantic, the black-haired lieutenant said, I am almost finished with my analysis, Commander. Finish faster. She gazed at the view screen and showed what the bridge had on their main viewer. The Musashi had gotten some shots into the outpost before one of the Jem'Hadar ships cut them off. Now each ship had the Jem'Hadar on their tail, with the outpost itself taking potshots as well. The Sentinel shields were now down to 20%. Patel's voice sounded over the comm systems. Divert power to shields. In addition to getting their new assignment, the Sentinel had gotten crew replacements at DS9. One of them, a kid who didn't look old enough to be let out of his house alone, said, I can't get the power to divert to the shields. Gomez could hear the panic in the young man's voice. Take it from wherever you need it, Ensign. Just keep the shields up. No, it's not that. The control circuit's refused. Gomez rolled her eyes. If you can't reprogram, reroute. The ensign nodded quickly. Right, of course. Sorry, Commander. Just keep your head cool. Was I ever that young and stupid, Gomez thought? Commander, Steinberg said, if we bring the shield frequency down into the lower regions, we should be able to defend against the outpost weapon. Lower. Yes, sir. It was a counterintuitive move, which no doubt was the Dominion's thinking. The baby ensign said, shields back up to 80%. Nice work, Gomez said. Steinberg, bring the frequency down. Aye, the lieutenant said. She tapped her comm badge. Bridge, we're lowering shield frequency. That should allow us to defend against the outpost. Recommend transmitting data to the Musashi immediately. Acknowledged, Patel said. Good job, Gomez. The Jem'Hadar ship then fired on them again, pounding at the shields. At this frequency, Steinberg said, we've got to keep them at 60% or the Jem'Hadar will rip us to pieces. Gomez went through the mental picture of the Sentinel in her head. The Akira-class ship had a compact retro design, reminiscent of the old pre-Federation Earth starships. There wasn't a lot of wasted space. Still, Bridge, we need to evac decks 8, 9, and 10 right away. Those were crew quarters, holodecks, and recreational facilities. None of them necessary right now, and only minimal staff was there at present. Amalfitano and Patel, bless their hearts, didn't even question the request. Attention all hands, Amalfitano said. This is the captain. Evacuate decks 8, 9, and 10 immediately. Steinberg, the second everyone's out of those decks, cut off all power and divert as much as you can of it to the shield. Silently, Gomez cursed whichever idiot designer thought it was a good idea to make holodeck systems incompatible with other ship systems. We really could use that power right now. But at least the other power that was used for those decks could be put to good use. Chatter from the bridge came over the intercom. Continuous fire on the Jem'Hadar. Their aft shields are failing. Concentrate fire there, Grimnar. Hi, sir. 10 May. Bring us to 253 Mark 9. Try to drive a wedge between them. Direct hit! Our shields are down to 65%! Steinberg looked at Gomez. Sir, we can't keep this up. If we stick with the lower frequency, we're more vulnerable to the Jem'Hadar. We're not exactly overburdened with options, Gomez said. Shields are down! Gomez turned. What the hell happened? Steinberg checked a console. Lucky shot. They got through to one of our emitters. The Jem'Hadar don't rely on luck. Gomez said, and neither do we. Reroute, get the shields back up to full. Are those 3 decks evacuated yet? Not yet. We can't wait. Divert the power. Aye, sir. Even on as small a ship as the Sentinel, there was considerable waste in the life support system. Even with it taken offline, there would be enough air just sitting in the corridors to last a couple of hours, and at red alert, they'd probably all have wrist lamps in any case. And if they don't, well, that's just too damn bad, she thought a little unkindly. They should have evac'd by now. The young ensign, whose name she finally remembered was Natal, said, Shields back up to full. Sir, this jury rig won't last. Request permission to rewire junction 92A5. Gomez frowned, then smiled. Good idea. That junction was a backup for the holodeck systems and could easily accommodate a shield rerouting, at least for a couple of hours. It would take a few minutes, but the present setup would hold in the meanwhile. Thank you, sir. Ensign Natal moved off, grinning with an enthusiasm that Gomez remembered seeing in the mirror back when she was the dumb young ensign, and Geordie LaForge was the chief engineer doling out praise only when earned. She often missed those days on the Enterprise. She had so many good friends there. Leon Sue, Reg Barkley, Gar Costa, Wes Crusher, Ella Chance, Ella Clancy, Denny Russell. Even LaForge was more a friend than he really was a CO. And of course Kieran. Lovable, goofy, wonderful Kieran. One of the other engineers cried out from near the warp core, startling her out of her all-too-brief reverie. Commander, containment system's fluctuating. We've got to take the warp drive offline. Damn it. Do it! She tapped her comm badge. Bridge, we've lost warp drive. Not much of an issue right now, Patel said. At least you've got shields re-energized. Gomez pursed her lips. Yeah, but our hat's running out of rabbits. As if on cue, one of the Jem'Hadar strike ships exploded. Maybe yours is. Gomez could visualize Patel's toothy grin. Sir, the Musashi has lost shields. The other Jem'Hadar ship is moving in. Tenmei, cut them off. Draw their fire. Aye, sir. The maneuver apparently worked, as the Sentinel started taking dozens more hits from both the outpost and the Jem'Hadar. We can't keep this up, Steinberg said, the first sign of tenseness creeping into an exterior that was normally a Vulcan-like calm. The non-coms had taken to nicknaming him to Steinberg. Easy, Steinberg. We'll be fine. Gomez tried to sound reassuring, but she was too busy trying to figure out what the Musashi was doing. It looked like... No. The Musashi was on a suicide run, headed straight for the outpost. The Jem'Hadar realized it too, obviously, and as it and the outpost both changed their firing pattern to concentrate on the Musashi. Amalfitano's voice cried out, Tenmei, get between them and the Musashi. We have to give them time. 2 seconds that seemed like hours passed, and the Musashi rammed into the Dominion outpost, annihilating it. Sonya Gomez learned the most valuable lesson of her life shortly after she reported to the Enterprise, and the board carved a section out of the ship's hull, costing the ship 18 crew members. When she found she couldn't get her mind around the loss of 18 people, LaForge had said the words that she spoke now, over a decade later, to her staff. We'll have time to grieve later. Steinberg, get the shields back to their regular frequency. Ensign, how's the jury rig? Almost done, Natal called out from under her console. Be done. I want this ship with full defenses. Grimna, Amalfitano was saying even as Gomez spoke. Give the Jem'Hadar everything we got. 2 seconds that actually seemed like 2 seconds later, the Jem'Hadar ship exploded in a satisfying conflagration, a plume of fire that was quickly consumed by the vacuum of space. Which left the Sentinel alone amid a cloud of debris that used to be 4 starships and an outpost, behind enemy lines, without warp power. Engineering, Patel said. How soon can you get the warp drive up and running? Gomez and Steinberg walked over to inspect the warp core. Give us a minute. Amalfitano said, Make it a quick minute, Commander. The Jem'Hadar called for backup, and I really don't want to be here when they arrive. Grimnar's voice cut in. Long-range sensors are picking up a Breen ship. Then we're dead. That to Gomez sounded like Ensign Seamus, a notorious doomsayer whom Gomez had rotated out of the engine room due to the effect he had on morale. She wondered how the hell he contrived to get bridge duty. She also wondered if there was some way she could change the readings that were now displayed in front of her in Steinberg. Patel added, Grimnar, how long before the Breen get here? At present speed, about 1 hour and 10 minutes. I was afraid of that, Gomez said. Captain, we won't be able to get warp drive up and running in less than 2 hours. What if we do a cold restart? Gomez couldn't help but smile. That estimate was with a cold restart, Captain. They'll know we're an enemy vessel a lot sooner than that, Grimnar said. The debris will mask us for a little while, but the closer they get, the more likely they are to see us for what we are, in which case they may increase speed. No, they won't, Gomez said without even realizing at first why she said it. Then she spent half a second thinking it through. Steinberg, get to work on the warp core. Natalia, you're with me. We need to bring the warp field online and reconfigure it. Natal frowned. What's the point of bringing the warp field online if we can't go to warp? Isn't that a huge waste of energy? Especially if you don't have the matter-antimatter system online? The ensign's question was reasonable. Without the power provided by the constant annihilation of matter and antimatter in the core, the ship was running on emergency power. But then, Gomez thought, if this doesn't constitute an emergency, I don't know what does. Before she could explain things to Natal, Amalfitano asked, Are you thinking what I think you're thinking, Commander? Yes, Captain. We're going to reconfigure the warp field so those Breen think we're a Cardassian freighter. Patel chuckled. I guess your idea gets a practical run-through after all, Sonya. So it would seem, sir, yes. Get someone up here to install the holofilter on the comm systems, Amalfitano said. We're going to need to talk our way through this, too, and I'll be a lot more convincing as a gull than a captain. Yes, sir. Gomez sent 2 of her people up to the bridge, then sat down with Natal and called up the specs for her warp field reconfiguration. Natal whistled. Impressive work, Commander, if you don't mind my saying so. I do mind, Ensign, she said, all seriousness, then broke into a grin. Say that again after it works. Yes, sir, Natal said, returning the grin. Good, Gomez thought. He set the grief aside. He's not thinking about all the people who've died today. He's focused on what he has to do to keep himself from being added to that list. That's the only way we're going to get through this. Amazingly enough, the Breen bought it. Gomez had been far too busy, first getting the warp field realigned, then helping Steinberg and the others get the containment unit up and running so that they could use the warp drive to know what was happening on the bridge. All she knew was that the Breen ship went away after what she imagined was a tense 15 minutes. 1 hour and 47 minutes after they started, Gomez tapped her comm badge and said, Bridge, warp drive is online. 2 hours, huh? Patel said. We were motivated to speed it up, Gomez said with a relieved smile at Steinberg, who returned it. Got to work down there, Amalfitano said, but keep that realigned warp field. We're not on a timetable now, and I'm just as happy to stay at warp 4 if people will think we're Cardassian. No problem, Captain. She gave Steinberg a glance, and he nodded. On it. Taking a look around at her staff, she took pride in what they had accomplished. In what she had accomplished. The idea of realigning the warp field had come to her in a night of tinkering. One of those inspirations that suddenly slams you behind the eyes. She stayed up all night working out the logistics, then brought it to Patel, who in turn brought it to Amalfitano, who told her to bring it up in the meeting in Deep Space Nine. An inspiration that quite probably saved all their lives. It wasn't until they crossed safely back into Federation space, after being passed by several Jem'Hadar ships that didn't challenge them, that Gomez allowed herself to feel for the hundreds of people lost on the Musashi and the Fredrickson. The grief was only slightly alleviated by the news that the strike on Orias-3 was successful. It was a major victory for the Alpha Quadrant. To be continued in part 2 of War Stories, which we'll kick off with next week. And that'll run through the 4 Tuesdays in July. And again, that'll be just an adventure of the U.S.S. Da Vinci. We'll get to see Gomez's predecessor as first officer on the Da Vinci, Commander Salek, as well as Lenz's predecessor, Dr. Tydoan, and the previous linguist as well. All sorts of cool stuff. So hopefully you'll enjoy it. It also is Fabian Stevens' first mission on the Da Vinci when he reports to the ship. So check that out next week. Meanwhile, check me out online, DeCandido.net. Check out my blog at decandido.wordpress.com. And, support me on Patreon at patreon.com/KRAD. Thank you very much. Please keep watching and please stay safe.